Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're decoding nature's ultimate survival tool, reproduction. Think about it. Every single living thing around us, from the tallest tree outside to the humans in our own families, exists because genetic information was successfully passed down from one generation to the next. Reproduction isn't just some basic biological process. It is literally the blueprint of life. Okay, let's dive right into this and uncover exactly how different organisms manage to pull off this incredible feat.
Here's the roadmap for today. We're going to start with plant botany, checking out flower anatomy and pollination. Then we'll shift gears to human biology to cover the male and female reproductive systems and trace the journey to fertilization. Finally, we'll wrap it all up with a quick board exam mastery quiz. Let's jump in.
All right, Section 1, the anatomy of a flower and plant reproduction.
So let's start with the structurally fascinating world of plant reproduction. You've probably seen a classic longitudinal cross-section of a flower before. It's an absolute must-know for your exams. The flower? It's essentially the primary reproductive engine of an angiosperm, or flowering plant. To us, it might just look like a pretty arrangement of petals, but biologically speaking, it's a highly specialized piece of machinery designed for literally one single purpose: creating the next generation of seeds.
Let's actually break that machinery down into its 4 distinct layers, or whorls. Right at the very base, we've got the calyx. These are the green sepals that protect the flower back when it's just a vulnerable little bud. Moving up, there's the corolla, the colorful petals. Think of petals as nature's flashy billboards, right? They're specifically there to grab the attention of pollinators like bees and birds. Then we hit the actual reproductive organs. The androecium, or the stamens, is the male reproductive part, and right smack in the center is the gynoecium, also called the carpel or pistil, which is the female reproductive part.
Okay, let's compare the male and female organs directly so we can really understand how they work. The male stamen consists of a stalk called the filament, which basically holds up the anther. And that anther? It's a sac-like structure that actually produces and stores the pollen grains. Simple enough, right? Now, the female pistil has 3 main parts. There's the stigma at the very top, which is super sticky so it can catch that pollen. Then there's the style, a long tube connecting the top to the bottom. And finally, the swollen base called the ovary, which houses the ovules, or egg cells. I highly recommend committing these distinct structures to memory because they're the total foundation for everything we're about to cover.
Moving on to Section 2, the pollination process, or as I like to call it, nature's matchmaking.
So now that we know the parts, how do plants actually transfer this genetic material? Well, pollination is simply the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, but it happens in 2 main ways. Self-pollination, or autogamy, is when pollen transfers within the exact same flower or to another flower on that very same plant. Cross-pollination, or allogamy, is when pollen travels between flowers of completely different plants of the same species. The crucial takeaway here is that cross-pollination introduces genetic variety. It mixes things up. This is a huge favorite for board exam differentiation questions, so make sure you've got this locked down.
Here's the thing, though. Pollen usually can't move on its own. It needs delivery drivers. We call these the agents of pollination, and they fall into 2 groups. First, the abiotic, or non-living agents. This includes the wind, where plants basically just rely on a lucky gust of air to carry their pollen, and water, which is mostly used by aquatic plants. Then we have the biotic, or living agents. This is where your insects, birds, and even animals like bats step up to the plate. Fun fact, insects are actually the most common pollinators out there for flowering plants.
It's truly amazing to see how plants have perfectly co-evolved to match their chosen delivery driver. Take a look at wind pollination. If a plant uses the wind, its pollen needs to be incredibly light, non-sticky, and produced in massive amounts just to increase the odds of hitting a target. Its stigma is going to be large and feathery, kind of like a net to catch that airborne pollen. And the flowers? They don't waste precious energy on bright petals or nectar. But if a plant relies on insects, it produces sticky pollen with a rough surface, so it clings to the insect's legs. The stigma is sticky, and the flowers are large, brightly colored, and loaded with sweet nectar to lure those bugs in. It's just a perfect biological transaction.
All right, Section 3, male reproductive system, human biology.
Let's shift gears entirely from plant botany over to human biology, where we find a vastly different setup. Unlike a flower, where everything is beautifully displayed in a single open cup, the human male reproductive system is a complex network of internal and external organs and ducts. The whole entire system is engineered for 2 massive tasks: producing the male sex cells and safely delivering them. Let's trace how that pathway actually works. The primary reproductive organs are the testes, a pair of structures sitting outside the main body cavity in the scrotal sex. This placement is absolutely crucial, by the way, because sperm production requires a slightly cooler temperature than the rest of the body. So the testes produce the sperm, and importantly, they also secrete the hormone testosterone. Once they're produced, the sperm travel up a duct called the vas deferens. Along the way, accessory glands like the prostate and seminal vesicles add special fluids. This fluid nourishes the sperm and keeps them swimming, creating what we know as semen. Finally, the urethra acts as the common exit passage.
So, what exactly is this whole system delivering? Well, the sperm. The sperm is the male gamete, which is a microscopic, highly specialized cell. It has a head that tightly packs the DNA, that's the genetic blueprint. Right behind that is a midpiece packed to the brim with mitochondria. Why? Well, mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, and this tiny vehicle needs an immense amount of energy to make it swim. It's literally like packing a massive biological battery. Finally, it has a tail, or flagellum, that acts like a propeller to move it forward. It's a purpose-built vehicle designed for a highly energetic journey.
Which brings us to Section 4, the female reproductive system, producing and nurturing.
When we explore the female counterpart next to the male system, the structural differences are pretty incredible. The male system, as we just saw, is primarily engineered as a delivery mechanism, producing gametes and transporting them out. The female system, on the other hand, is largely internal. It's designed not just to produce gametes, but to safely receive the male gametes, facilitate their meeting, and then actually accommodate the long-term, highly complex development of a fetus.
As we visualize the internal architecture of the female system, I really want you to trace the pathway of the egg.
The primary organs here are the paired ovaries. Now, when a girl is born, her ovaries already contain thousands of immature eggs. Starting at puberty, one mature ovum or egg is released every single month. The ovaries also produce the hormones estrogen and progesterone. Once released, the egg is caught by the fallopian tubes. And listen up, this is a critical exam fact. The fallopian tube is the actual site where fertilization happens. If it gets fertilized, the egg travels down into the uterus or the womb, which is a muscular organ where fetal development takes place. The vagina acts as the birth canal and the area that receives the sperm. And remember, if fertilization doesn't happen, the blood-rich lining of the uterus simply sheds. That's the cyclic 28-day event we know as menstruation.
Section 5, the journey to fertilization, gamete fusion.
Let's actually jump back to our flowering plants for a second to see this incredible process in action. Once a pollen grain successfully lands on that sticky stigma we talked about, it faces a bit of a problem. The egg cell is way down in the ovary. So what does it do? The pollen grain literally germinates. It grows this long pollen tube that digs its way all the way down through the solid style tissue. It acts just like a tunnel so the male germ cell can travel safely down to the ovary.
To summarize those steps sequentially for your notes, first, pollen lands on a suitable stigma. Second, the pollen tube grows down through the style. Third, the male germ cell reaches the ovary. And fourth, it fuses with the egg cell inside the ovule. This fusion right here is called fertilization, and the resulting combined cell is called a zygote. And honestly, here's a totally magical post-fertilization fact. After this happens, the flower's petals dry up and fall off. The ovary swells up and turns into a fruit. And those ovules inside, they turn into the seeds.
The concept of fertilization is universally biological. In humans, obviously, we don't have pollen tubes, but we do have swimming sperm. Fertilization occurs when a single, highly energetic sperm manages to reach and successfully fuse with an ovum, specifically while it's traveling through that fallopian tube. Just like in plants, this fusion of two gametes creates a single new cell, the zygote, and that one cell contains the complete, complex genetic blueprint to grow into a brand new human. Finally, Section 6, Board Exam Mastery. Let's test your knowledge.
Let's make sure all this information actually translates into top marks for you. Here's a classic logic puzzle you might face on an exam. Assertion: the probability of survival of an organism produced through sexual reproduction is more than asexual. Reason: variations provide advantages to individuals for survival. Okay, so how do we solve this? First, is the assertion true? Yes, it is. Sexual reproduction combines genetics from two parents, which is generally way more robust than just cloning one parent asexually. Second, is the reason true? Yes. Genetic variations mean that if a disease or sudden climate change hits, some individuals will naturally have traits to survive it. Finally, does the reason explain the assertion? Absolutely. Because sexual reproduction creates those very variations, the probability of survival goes way up. So both statements are true, and the reason perfectly explains the assertion. Easy, right?
Well, we've covered a massive amount of ground today, from the elegant, intricate structures of a flower to the highly specialized networks of human biology. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final, thought-provoking question. An individual flower, or an individual human for that matter, can survive their entire life without ever reproducing. It just isn't strictly required for an individual's day-to-day survival. So why does nature spend such incredible amounts of energy, elaborate designs, and complex resources engineering these blueprints of life? What's the bigger picture? I hope this explainer has left you eager to dive even deeper into the fascinating logic of biology. Keep exploring and keep learning.